Good morning. Today we are going to start a chapter 1, reproduction in organisms. And in this chapter, we are going to learn the definition of reproduction, and then what's the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. What are the different types of asexual reproduction and which is a better mode of reproduction, whether it is asexual or it is sexual. So basic concepts we are going to cover in this unit, and then in the next continuation part, maybe in the next session, we will start with the other concept. So reproduction, basically first we need to be familiar with the term reproduction. What is a reproduction? Simple term, reproduction is a biological process. It's a biological phenomenon which is occurring. What happens during this time? In this period, the organisms gives rise to young ones or the offsprings who are similar to the parents. So basically you can say that reproduction is a biological process in which an organism gives rise to young ones who are similar to their parents. Now the offsprings that are produced, what happens to them? They start growing, they start maturing, and in turn they also reproduce to produce the new offspring. There is a cycle which is existing, cycle of birth, cycle of growth, and during the growth phase it is a reproduction, and finally every organism dies. So it's a cycle. All of us are born, we grow, and we die. Now, why reproduction is important in this cycle? It is because it enables a continuation of generation. Okay, continuation of species, generation after generation. Human beings are existing, all of us are here. It is because of reproduction, continuation of species, generation after generation. Not only human beings, all the living organisms, from microorganisms to the highest organism or the higher organisms, that's human beings, everybody undergoes reproduction. Reproduction enables the continuation of species, and that is continued generation after generation. That is why reproduction is a very important phenomenon in a living organism. Now, all the living organisms, they have got their lifespan. Every living organism has got its lifespan. All of us have lifespan. So, how do you define lifespan? What are you going to define that? So, what is lifespan? Lifespan is the period from birth to the natural death of an organism. Different organisms have got different lifespan. So period from birth to the natural death of an organism, it's its lifespan. And no individual is immortal. All of us need to die, except the single celled organisms. All the eukaryotic organisms and multicellular organisms, all of us need to die. Okay, only it is the single celled organisms which are mortal. So we generally say that no individual is mortal except the single celled organism. Now, why do we say that single celled organisms are mortal? They do not die. It is because the parent itself will divide to form two daughter cells. So it just continues, it goes on continuing. There is no death over there. That's the reason we say that single celled organisms are immortal. Now every living organism has got their lifespan. Now the size of an organism cannot be compared with the lifespan. We cannot just looking at the size, but just by looking at elephant or looking at the butterfly or the dog, just looking at their size, we cannot determine their lifespan. Every living organism have got their own lifespan. Few to mention over here, for an example, just randomly picked up butterfly. Butterfly's lifespan is 2 to 3 weeks. Fruit fly, Drosophila, lifespan is for 30 days. Rose, lifespan is for 5 to 7 years. Dog, lifespan is from 20 to 50 years. Crow, lifespan is 15 years. Parrot, lifespan is 140 years. Banana tree, 25 years. So different organisms have got their different lifespan. The size of an organism cannot be correlated with the lifespan of an organism. Okay. Now, why reproduction is important? Why the reproduction should be there? Reproduction is important because there is genetic variation. There is a genetic variation during a sexual reproduction, during the process of sexual reproduction. There is genetic variation. There's a genetic variation which is being inherited, and it is carried on from one generation to the next generation. The statement goes, no, it's a biological process where the species inherit the characters. What is that inheriting the characters? They are inheriting the characters because there is genetic variation. That's why reproduction is important. Now, what are the other factors which play a very important role for reproduction? Organisms habitat. Habitat means the place where the organism live. Organisms habitat, internal physiology, and other factors are collectively very important how an organisms reproduce. There should be favorable condition for an organism to reproduce. So organisms, habitats, internal physiology, and there are various other factors which is collectively responsible how it favors reproduction. Now coming to the type, that was a general introduction about the reproduction. Now coming to the types of reproduction. Asexual and sexual reproduction. Two types has been mentioned in your book. So asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. What is the difference between asexual and sexual reproduction? As the names, it specifies very clearly. Asexual reproduction. Offsprings are produced by single parent. It's a single parent, or we also call it as uniparental. The other term for single parent is uniparental. There's a single parent involved. For example, in case of amoeba, the single organism itself divides to form two daughter cells. That's the meaning over here. Offspring is produced by a single parent. Only one parent is involved, then we call it as uniparental. Then what happens in sexual reproduction? Offspring is produced by two parents of opposite sex. Then we also use another term called as biparental. Is the difference clear? The first difference. Offspring is produced by single parent. Offspring is produced by two parents of opposite sex. Asexual reproduction without the involvement of gamete formation. There is no gamete formation at all. We will be learning in higher classes what is gamete formation. Okay, gamete basically over here means it is the sex cells. It's concerned with the sex cells. So if the organism itself is a single cell, then where's the point of about the sex cell? So here there is no involvement of gamete formation, whereas in case of sexual reproduction there is involvement of gamete formation. Gametes are formed. You can differentiate between the male gamete and the female gamete. For example, in case of human beings, you can differentiate between the egg and the sperm. Egg and sperm is a gamete, male gamete and female gamete. So here you cannot differentiate. First of all, there is no formation of gamete itself. There is no involvement of gamete, whereas here there is the involvement of gamete formation. So when no gametes are formed, of course, there will be no fusion of male and female gametes. In lower organisms, you cannot even identify whether it is a male or a female. So where's the point of identifying the male gamete and female gamete? Does not involve the fusion of male and female gamete. Here, it involves the fusion of male and female gametes. egg and sperm fuses to form zygote. So you can clearly differentiate male and female gamete. Since it is asexual reproduction, it is just dicto, cut, copy, paste. There is no genetic variation. Whereas in case of sexual reproduction, there is genetic variation. Genetic variation results in, the genetic variation is there because of recombination. First piece you have studied meiosis. In prophase 1, pairing of chromosomes takes place, then crossing over takes place, and then there's a genetic variation, and genetic variation results in evolution. So always sexual reproduction is much better than asexual because of genetic variation. Genetic variation results in evolution. So these are the basic differences between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction takes place in the lower organisms, organisms like amoeba, hydra, all such cases. It's here asexual reproduction is taking place, whereas this is taking place in higher organisms, let's say human beings, plants, okay, animals. In all such organisms, even the microorganisms, sexual reproduction is taking place. So these are the major differences between asexual and sexual method of reproduction. Now let's just go a little deep. Let's try to understand what is asexual reproduction. So as I've already told that we've already discussed that asexual reproduction, a single parent is capable of producing the offspring. It is uniparental. It is uniparental. A single parent is involved over here. So it is uniparental and a single individual is capable of producing the offspring. Now what happens to the offsprings that are produced? Offsprings will be dicto, exactly the same copy of their parent. And all the offspring will be identical to one another. For example, in your house, if you have a sibling, you look different and your sibling looks different. There is a variation, but that does not happen in asexual organism. The offsprings that are produced are identical to one another. You cannot differentiate between one amoeba and another amoeba. One paramecium and another paramecium. You know as a whole that is a paramecium, that's amoeba, that's a hydra, that's a sponge. But there is no difference between one and the other. They are identical to one another. They are exact copies of their parents. There is no variation. See, we are not exact copies of our parent. There is a variation. We look different. But in asexual reproducing organism, they are exact copies of their parents. They are morphologically and genetically similar individuals. Morphologically means external appearance, even genetically. So they are morphologically and genetically similar. Hence, organisms produced through asexual reproduction are referred to as clones. And asexual reproduction is very common in single-celled organisms, some plants and some animals with a very simple organization. Simple organization over here means body organization. Asexual reproduction is seen in protists as well as the monerans, kingdom Protista and kingdom Monera asexual method of reproduction. And we are going to learn with the different types of asexual reproduction, like first one binary fission, then we'll learn budding, then zoospores, conidia, fragmentation, and then encystation and sporulation. All these are the different types of asexual reproduction. So let's take one by one. First one, binary fission. What is the meaning of binary fission? Binary. 2, multiple of 2. So what happens over here? See, the picture is self-explanatory. You can see here, there's a single amoeba. So basically we refer amoeba as a single cell. So a cell divides into two halves. See, all the content is getting doubled and the cells will just stretch out like this, and everything, there's a cleavage formation over here. You can see here, stretching out, there's a cleavage formation, and a single cell divides into exactly two daughter cells. There is no variation at all. Whatever the content was there here in the parent cell, in the parent cells, everything is being transferred here equally without any changes. That is why they're called as clones. So binary fission means a cell divides into two halves, and each half, each individual, we generally call it as daughter cell. Each daughter cells develops into a new organism, and that is, and next what happens, this will divide further into two, this further into two, and it keeps on continuing. Okay, there's no end over here. That is how the binary fission is taking place. Example for binary fission is amoeba and paramecium. That is, the first one was binary fission. Second one is budding or a bud. What is this bud? It's a lateral outgrowth. If you look at the picture over here, this is a picture of Hydra. At one point, the small buds will start appearing at a particular point over here, and it will start just developing into a bud. It will fully mature and then it will detach from the parent. It will detach from the parent, or it will separate. It will mature and grow into new organism. That is what is budding. Here division is unequal. Difference between binary fission and that one is, in binary fission, the division was equal, whereas in case of budding, the division is unequal. Small buds are produced, they remain attached initially to the parent cell, then they get separated and they mature into new organism. Example, budding in yeast as well as budding in hydra. The difference between the yeast and hydra is, in case of hydra, there's a single bud you are seeing over here, whereas in case of yeast, there's a yeast. You can see many buds are produced and they remain attached to each other, and then they detach. That is why we call it as chain of buds. And when the bud, in case of hydra and yeast, the bud is produced outside the body, then we call it as exogenous buds. But then what happens in case of sponges? In case of sponges, sponges belong to the phylum Porifera. In case of sponges, the bud is asexual reproductive unit. It is produced inside the body of sponge. See the difference. This is outside, exogenous. Here it is inside, endogenous. In case of sponges, then we give the name as gemmules. Gemmules is the name given to the bud. So when the bud is produced internally, as in case of sponges, we call it as gemmules. And these gemmules, a picture has been shown over here. Okay, these gemmules, they possess special cells called as arachiocytes. So budding in hydra, yeast, and budding in sponges. The difference between the two is, in case of hydra, the bud is exogenous, whereas in case of this one, sponges, the buds are endogenous. So we give the name as gemmules. Then other few examples to mention. Another one is zoospores. Zoospores example is Chlamydomonas here. You can see they are found in colonies, and then the colonies burst and many Chlamydomonas will be released. These Chlamydomonas are microscopic, not visible to the naked eye, and there's a presence of flagella. All these are flagella. That's why they are motile. The zoospores are minute, microscopic, and they are motile. They are seen commonly in case of algae and fungi. One such example to mention over here is Chlamydomonas. Similarly, okay, here the asexual method of reproduction is by spores. Okay, so that's why we have given the name as zoospores. Conidia, when the spores are motile, we call it as zoospores. Then non-motile spores, conidia. Conidia is seen in case of penicillium. There's a picture of penicillium, a fungi, and then you can see the conidiospores. Conidia produces spores called as conidiospores. These are non-motile. The difference between the two. This is motile. These are non-motile. And again, this is, you can see here, these are produced in chains. These are produced in groups. So asexual reproduction by means of spores, zoospores, chlamydomonas. The spores are microscopic and the spores are motile. This one, no? So asexual method of reproduction, other form of reproduction is by fragmentation. As the name specifies, fragmentation. So what happens over here? Parent. This is a picture of a planaria. So parent breaks into different fragments. It could be any number of pieces. And each piece grows into an adult. That is what is called as fragmentation. Then other form of asexual reproduction is also seen in case of amoeba, which is called as encystation and sporulation. What is an encystation? Just to understand, basically when the conditions are unfavorable in for amoeba. When the conditions are unfavorable for amoeba, amoeba withdraws its pseudopodia. It withdraws its pseudopodia and secretes a thick wall around itself, which is called as cyst. Which is called as cyst. And it remains in that dormant stage until the conditions become favorable for it. So when the conditions are favorable, the encysted amoeba divides by multiple fission, and it starts producing many pseudospores. And then the cyst wall bursts, spores are liberated, and this grows into many amoeba. So these are the basically various kinds of asexual reproduction seen in lower organisms. And next class we will talk about asexual reproduction in plants, which is also known as vegetative propagation. Thank you.